Good morning. Very nice to see you all again. Now we're going to do something extremely fun.
My mom always said life was like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get.
I think I'm having what the Germans call a Schadengasm. Where do they teach you to talk like this? In some Panama City sailor want a hump bar? Or is this getaway day and your last shot at his whiskey? Sell crazy someplace else. We're all stocked up here.
I believe it or not, I watch my words very carefully. There are those that think I'm a very stable genius, okay?
Hey everybody, how you doing? Hope you're staying safe. Good to see y'all, kinda, this week. What's new? Hello, Sargon. Oh, sorry couldn't join us live. Yeah, with the time change here in the US, everything's an hour later for everyone else around the world, so sorry if that is inconvenient. Hey Shiny and Kaulos. So yeah, feel free to check in and say hello. Let us know where you're watching from, and let us know again any questions you have during the chat, because having those questions helps me figure out what you guys are interested in knowing about. So today we're going to talk about the features. We're going to start a series, I think, on the facial features, starting with the eyes. Whether you're a portrait artist or caricature artist, it's good to understand the anatomy and the forms of the eyes, of all the features, from a realistic point of view, and then you can decide how much you want to stretch it or change things. And when you do change or exaggerate things, you'll be maybe doing it more correctly or with an understanding of the underlying structure. So, yeah, today we're going to do the eyes. And it's probably going to be a shorter stream than usual, just because there's not honestly a lot to talk about. I'm going to go over a little bit of the anatomy and then do a few demos, just painted demos, how I paint the eye in color from a few different types. Say hello, Alan. Hey, Jim. Fernanda, welcome. Yeah, so, yeah, I don't really have anything other news to report right now. I'm just go ahead and get into it here. Let's take a look at our materials. I've got a bunch of different eyes, eye photo reference of different types of people. And let's go ahead and get a example here. Let's draw something. Okay. Now, everybody's eye, of course, is different. There's going to be different shapes and proportions, and spaces between things are going to be different. But they all have all eyes have the same basic anatomy and the same essential structure. And that is, the eye is basically a globe or a circle. Just like that, except an actual circle. Then the iris and pupil in the center is a bit of a concave form. So if you think of the eye as a three-dimensional sphere, this is almost like the Death Star in, Star Wars, where it's a bit of a scoop or a concave shape. So if your shading is over here, if your light source is off to the right, the shadow in the iris is going to actually be the opposite. Now, I don't think that's necessarily because it's a really true bowl shape or concave shape. I think it has more to do with the refraction of the light from the cornea. Because if you look at the eyeball from the side, the cornea actually sticks off from the surface of the eye quite a bit. It has a separate structure. And it's going to bend light and shadow in such a way to make it look like the upper right portion of the iris is in shadow, which is opposite of what it is on the globe of the eye. So just that one tip alone, when I learned that, I'm like, yeah, of course that makes sense. Then the highlight is going to be usually in the darkest part of the iris, which is great because it helps create that contrast between the darkest part of the eye and the lightest part of the eye, right in the same area. So that's good to know. Looking at the head overall, how the eyes are situated on the head. Let's take a top-down look of the head. Say this is the top of the head. Here's the ears. This is the front is this way. Here's the nose. So the eyeballs sit within the orbits of the eyes, protruding from the skull just slightly. And they're about one eye width apart when you're looking at the eye, of course. But the inside corner of the eye is going to be more forward, more what's the interior. It's going to be anterior to the outside corners of the eyes. The inside corners of the eyes are going to be roughly right about here, and the outside corners of the eyes are going to be posterior, meaning they're going to be wrapped around the side of the head. So we don't look at eyes on a flat plane like it's on the surface of a square. It's like two spheres sticking out of different ends of the cylinder. So you guys probably know a lot of this stuff. This is fairly basic stuff, but I just wanted to go over it in case it's not that obvious to a lot of people. Going back to our main eye here. Now let's just say this is the subject's right eye, the eye that we look at someone on, and it'll be the eye on the left. So the inside corner is, here's the nose. So the upper lid is gonna generally rest in a neutral position when the eye's just looking straight forward, right around just above the pupil, which actually should be a little bit bigger. Of course, it's different based on the different lighting that a person is in. But the upper eyelid generally rests in the midway point on the in the iris, between the pupil and the edge of the iris. Whereas the lower lid is going to generally just graze or touch the bottom of the iris. Again, it's more of a stereotype or just an average. Some people are going to be different, of course, and some people have more eye fat and skin hanging over the eyes, so it's going to make the eyelids droop a little bit more. But the inside corner of the eye kind of goes down at a sharp angle here to the inner canthus, which is the corner. And there are actually two separate structures at the inner canthus. It's the semilunar fold, which is, you can sort of think of it like a third eyelid, is how it's been described. It doesn't close, it doesn't really move, but it's sort of like a membrane or a flap. And then there's the caruncula, the caruncula lacrymalis, I think. It's basically just like a protuberance, a fleshy protuberance. So you might sometimes see like two highlights on these two structures, depending on the lighting that's going on there. But just be aware of that, like a little sort of spherical caruncula shape, and then the plica semilunaris, which is the third eyelid. The lower lid in general is going to be straighter, not have as much curvature to it in most people, compared to the upper eyelid. The upper eyelid's going to have a high peak and then curve back down. And, you know, people's eyes often vary between the axis. For the horizontal axis, generally the inner and outer corners are roughly level. They're roughly on the same level. Or the outer corner, the outer canthus might be a little bit higher if you're to draw, you know, an axis line through that center. Gotta love my anatomical drawings here. Then the eyelids themselves. The upper eyelid has a lot more thickness to it, and it's wider than the lower lid, so it'll come out wider. And then there's the skin cover fold or epicanthic fold, which creates this crease between the eyelid and the skin above it. And it generally follows the curvature of the upper eyelid. And depending on your ethnic type, the eye cover fold or this crease will diverge at the inner canthus, or it will converge. Usually in Asian races, the eye cover fold will converge at the caruncula, the inside corner, like so. Then the lower eyelid doesn't move a whole lot, and you often don't see it on young people. You don't see a difference or a much of a change in plane between the lower lid and then the cheek beneath it. There's actually one other structure that is sometimes visible in people, and that's the tear bag. It's what some people often refer to as the lower eyelid, but it's not. It's basically just a collection of fatty deposits, which is more obvious when you get older. But there will often be two distinct structures here: the lower eyelid and then the tear bag. And don't also forget that the upper and lower eyelids have thickness to them. Generally, on a straight-on view, when the eye is in a normal position, we're not going to see the thickness of this upper eyelid, but we will if the eye is like looking up at it. That's something. But the top plane of the lower eyelid is actually an upward-facing plane, so we'll normally see that in an average view. We'll actually see that ridge or that ledge. Yeah, just trying to clean up the drawing here as we go. All right, fun anatomy, huh, guys? It's just this the sort of the this is just the detail stuff that you know, if you neglect it, it'll show in your work. It's not that sexy or exciting to always learn anatomy, but I personally find it fascinating. So I'm just adding a bit of shading here or cross-hatching really, to show you what essentially is going on there. And then, you know, there's the eyelashes and the eyebrows. The eyelashes, you know, people often render them out a little bit too much. They grow on the outer rims of the eyelids. Then they don't grow from, you know, the inner rim. They grow from just basically the outside. And the lower lid will have lashes, but usually not as much as the upper lid. And they generally grow upward and outward, and so when the eye closes, the eyelashes don't intertwine. They don't lock together. They stay separate. But whenever I am painting eyelashes, I do try to find groupings. I try to find natural shapes, how they clump together. And if they don't clump together, I will make them clump together. Just, you know, if I'm doing that much detail in an eye, I will find ways to make it designed like from an abstract point of view. I don't want to draw every single eyelash. That's not my particular style. I think Debbie's joining us here today. Are you following along, Debbie?
I am.
Nice. Any questions yet?
Not yet.
Cool. And that's the basic anatomy. I mean, it's not really important to know the inner working. I mean, sorry, the anatomical terms. It's fun to know. It's more important to understand the structure and what's going on. Oh, one other point I didn't mention: the inner corner of the eye over here. It sits on a different plane than the eyeball. For the outer corner, the corner of the eye here rests against the globe of the eye, so it wraps around. Whereas the inner corner sort of runs into the nose, or the side plane of the nose. So if you're looking at someone from a profile view, you'll notice that. I've actually got a few examples here. Let's see. Like this one shows it pretty well here. It's kind of blurry, but you get the idea. It's a really big plane change between what's happening here. Here's the globe of the eye, and then the inside corner of the eye sort of sits out from that. So even in a profile view or near profile view, you might still see the inside corner of the eye, and that's because it doesn't wrap around the eyeball. It's off from it. All right, so I have a few examples of eyes I'm going to be painting from today. Let's get rid of that. And let's see, I'm going to do these in color. Oh, you know, one other point, another just sort of tidbit to be aware of. Because the cornea of the eye sits off of the globe of the eye and creates an additional bump, when the eyeball is looking upward, it will often distort the upper lid. You can see the nice thickness of the upper lid here. But if this eye here, this iris, were off to the right, the peak of this eyelid would be off to the right as well. So it just, in a sort of exaggerated way, that's sort of what's happening there. So just be aware of that when you're drawing eyes at extreme angles. All right, let's start with a fairly standard, nice lighting, decent shadows. Whenever you're doing anatomical studies, it's really helpful to have shadows that help reveal the forms. So it can often be a while to find something that works. I had to search through a lot of my old photos to find decent pictures of the eyes, actually. And then I didn't really take pictures for the eyeballs. They were just for, like, portrait reference photos. So a lot of them, when you zoom in, they're a little bit grainy. So I apologize for that. All right, so I'm just going to do just a quickie just lay-in here of the eyeball. And I'm not going to do the globe and everything underneath it. I'm just sort of looking at what's happening here and just trying to find the shapes and the alignments, you know, the angles of things. And there's a lower lid here. Nicely shadowed by the light. So I'm looking at where the eyebrows end, and they sort of end. I'm drawing an imaginary line from up top to bottom here. The eyebrow, at least the dark part of the eyebrow, ends right where the outside corner of the eye is. And then there's a few straggly hairs just to the outside there. So I'm not really thinking about edges or anything right now. It's just a linear lay-in, a real, a real rough one, but that's okay. I'm gonna go ahead and grab a dark reddish brown color. Just a really warm red, really. And lay in my darkest shadows with my paintbrush. And I'm going to paint in a very blocky sort of shape way. I'm not going to be too precious with it. I just want to block in the big forms as quickly as possible. I find a reddish color works, a really warm, dark works best for things around the eye. If you go cool and black, it just... it doesn't look right. It doesn't look like a living person's eye. So, of course, when you get to the pupil and the iris, it can be a cooler black. All right, let's get some average middle tones in here. Just sort of make my best guess on those. I do usually recommend working on a toned canvas rather than a white one, just because it helps you judge the values a little bit better. Because some of these values may look dark to you at first because they're up against the white of the canvas. I'm just sort of mentally compensating for that effect. I'm just being aware of it, so it doesn't bother me too much. But it is good practice to work on a toned canvas surface, not on a white one. Well, the whites of the eyes, again, I didn't go over that term, but it's called the sclera. And they're not white. That's why I don't love calling them the whites of the eyes, because it's a little misleading, and, you know, to the uninitiated, they might just call them that and end up painting them too white because, hey, white is in the name. But they'll have a bluish tinge or a yellowish tinge. Sometimes with even hints of red if the eyes are more bloodshot.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
Alan's wanting to know, do you have any tips in relation to the position and distance of the eyebrows in relation to the eyes? He has a tendency of placing them too far or too close to the eye.
Well, as long as you're aware of that tendency or that habit, that's a good place to be. That's better than most people. So just be aware of it when you're doing it and just check the measurements. Just once you get well, you have to do it in the drawing stage, but you have to keep on checking on it as the drawing progresses or as the painting progresses, so it doesn't drift away from you. But yeah, you just have to be vigilant, really, just like anything with drawing or painting. And you can look at comparative distances, like you could say, look at the separation or the distance between, the width of the upper lid, the height of the upper lid, and how wide that is in comparison to the shape of the eyebrow, which is right above it. And here it's because there's a bit of shadow, so it's a bit confusing, but it's about the same width. There's about a similar distance between the crease of the upper eye and the eyebrow as there is between the crease of the upper eye and the edge of the upper lid. Whenever I do put dark, really black accents in the eyes, it's just in the pupils and maybe just underneath the upper lid for a bit. But I don't want to draw black or paint black across the entire width of the upper lid. I usually transition it to sort of a reddish tone here. And I'm just in the rough blocking in stage still. There's a lot, to do left. Got to do the colors of the eye here, of the iris. Sort of a greenish color. Never lose sight of the overall structure. Think about this eye. Remember, it's just a sphere sitting in a bowl with fat pads around it. There's not a really great analogy about how to think about it, but remember overall just the shading job that you're doing from dark to light. It's easy to get sucked up into the details and forget about the global lighting scheme and the shadow patterns. Yeah, this entire time I've been using a pretty blunt brush. It's my round quick painter, but now I'm going to switch over to a More of a velvet brush, the velvet round brush. Start creating some nicer blending.
Got some questions coming in.
Sure.
I have one from Murad wanting to know, can I start with black and white to learn value before I move to color?
Oh, definitely. That's always a good way to go. Yeah. Only move into color when you're ready, and yeah, don't stress about it. Just if you can do really good value paintings and value studies first, that will help you immensely when you move into color. Yeah. I always tell people that too when you want to move into any new medium that you're not familiar with, like a new paint medium. Start with just doing more grayscale studies. Don't worry about color, because just learn the materials with as few other variables as possible. And color is sort of the biggest and last variable you really need to worry about. Value is much more important.
I have another question. This one is from Ernesto. When painting, do you worry about your edges at the beginning or more towards the end?
I start worrying about them almost immediately. Not in the very, very beginning, like in the linear stage. Yeah, not too big of a deal. When you're still blocking things in and just getting the paint on the canvas, edges not quite as important, but you might want to start thinking about it during the block-in phase. However, if you're the type of painter who likes to, render as you go and finish one area and then move on, then yeah, you worry about the edges right from the get-go. It's more if you're like an alla prima style painter like I am, where you like to just mix paint as you go and resolve things on the fly. Yeah, that's where you start to need to worry about edges more early on. And, I'm just, 10, maybe 15 minutes into this, not maybe that much even, and I'm already, thinking about edges. And, I don't plan on doing this longer than 20 or 30 minutes. It should be a fairly quick study, hopefully. Yeah, if you neglect edges too long, you'll start to, at a certain point, you'll be like, hey, I got a really blocky, sloppy painting, and I haven't thought about edges this entire time. And so, yeah, it's definitely something you should worry about fairly early on in the process.
Oh, here's one that I think you'll want to answer. This is from Heimdall. Would painting a portrait normally and then deforming it by stretching it digitally produce a nice caricature?
Let me think about that. No, please don't do that. I can always see that when people do that. It's just they look odd, they look weird. There's probably not a person alive on the planet that can do that successfully. With the exception of maybe, I think his name is Rodney Pike. It's like probably the only one. Did photo stretched caricatures. But he actually understood the concepts of caricature, I think. I'm not sure if he still does that. I don't even know the person, really. It's a name I recognize from seeing that type of artwork done. But I don't know. I don't know why you'd want to do that. I mean, because some people might think maybe it's a quicker way to get a finished piece of artwork. But you're just taking someone else's work, so, photo, and I don't know. It's if you're doing that, I think you're focusing on the wrong things. You're focusing on what the finished thing looks like rather than the fundamental concepts of caricature. Because people, I think, people sometimes think of it as a shortcut to nice renderings or to get a finished looking painting, and it doesn't do that. It just looks like a manipulated photo. Yeah, if anyone posts manipulated photos on the Proco Caricature forum that I moderate, I delete them. Make me angry, actually. Just draw. Adding a little bit of shading and different values to the sclera of the eye. Oftentimes you'll see a cast shadow on the upper portion of the sclera You don't really see it here so much, but often in lighting you will see sort of a darker gray shadow here. So be aware of that when you see these things. That's kind of the main point about studying anatomy of anything in the body, is just to be aware of these oddities and things. When they come up, you'll understand what you're seeing, and you'll know how to include them in a way that makes them look good in a painting without being distracting, and how to improvise on the fly when maybe the photo reference isn't so good. So on the caruncula here, there's a bit of a highlight because it's a little globular, sort of rounded shape. And then the semilunar fold, or the like a semilunaris is the more Latin term, doesn't really have a highlight. It just sort of fades away and blends into the sclera of the eye. When you get to a certain point in the painting, you want to think about where the brightest brights are and where the darkest darks are. And so you got to maybe stand back, look, squint at your subject. And I haven't really done, like, you know, the major highlight in the eye yet. I'm, you know, sort of saving it. It's a little treat for myself, but you can put it at any time. You really don't need to, like, hold off on that. You can put it on early. In fact, it might even help sometimes judge the other values in the painting more accurately, to have the brightest highlight in there early on.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
This is a male eye. Will you be putting in eyelashes?
Actually, it is a female eye, I believe. But yeah. I don't really see eyelashes in this view, so I probably won't. You know, if they're really strong and evident, I probably would. But again, I'd probably do it in a, you know, in a way that sort of groups them together and minimizes their individual look. So if I were to add them, which I don't really see them in the photo here, I'll just create irregular sizes. Try not to be repetitive. And there is actually a pretty decent cast shadow on the lower lid from the eyelashes, on the outer corner of the eye here. And that will be cast on the lower lid down here, like so. But again, this is more of a painterly approach to the eye, doing an eye study. It's not really an, you know, medical grade eye study. And it could also use some straighter, harder edges here too. So I'm going to switch over to a brushier brush with brush strokes visible. Because if you don't want everything too soft, or it just looks a little weak anatomically. And from an artistic point of view too, you just want hard edges in places. Like maybe where the brightest contrast is, you can put a harder edge. Then you can break up the edges and the forms somewhat. You don't have to be too literal with how you interpret things in a painting. If you want to, like, you know, smear some of the paint, so to speak, from a, you know, either with a brush or with a smudge tool, you can maybe think about that.
Jim's sketch testing says he did a dog portrait once, and their irises are very strange.
Yeah, how so? I mean, they basically take up the whole eye. You don't really see the whites of the eyes on most dogs unless they're really looking in different directions. Is that what you mean? Or
I
is
don't
it
know.
like
Jim let us know. He said they have really odd-shaped irises. I guess, does it depend on the dog?
yeah, maybe. Okay, let's add that highlight in here finally. Right about on the edge of the iris. Put a bit of a bluish tinge on it as well, because I just decided the light is cool, even though it's not really that clear in the photo. I just decided that. Just made an artistic call there. And don't overdo it on the highlights in the eyes. Some people make them overly large, but in a realistic painting or a painterly painting, or you just do a little quickie, small. Don't just don't overemphasize the size of the reflection in the eye.
Jim says the irises are not round like they are in humans.
I hadn't really noticed. I mean, I know they're not round in like goats and reptiles and frogs and things,
that's their... Isn't that their pupil, though?
well, what do you mean?
That's not round in goats.
Oh, yeah. Well, I don't know about the iris. I never really looked too much at a goat iris versus the pupil. I just know they're kind of... The pupil's definitely square, but I don't know about the iris, maybe.
He says at least on the dog he painted it wasn't. I know I have done some wall-eyed dogs. You know, the dogs where the eyes kind of almost look in different directions. And I swear sometimes their irises look like rounded squares. I don't know if that's a thing with a certain breed, but I've seen it.
Okay. So, one eye study there. In a painterly way, you squint down at it, or if you shrink it down, the shapes kind of come together and looks more realistic, hopefully. But yeah, not a lot of detail. It's just a good understanding of the forms is really all you need. Let's do another eye type here. Let's do this guy. Okay. Let's start with a kind of a rough, blocky line here. Definitely differently shaped eye. A little bit more almond shaped, not open quite as much. There's almost equal curvature to the bottom lid as well as the top lid. And the eye cover fold sort of mirrors the same angle. It's a little wider at the outer portion of the eye and then converges at the inner canthus, but doesn't quite reach it totally. And the lower lid, it's very pronounced on him, but he doesn't have any really noticeable tear bag area beneath his eye.
Is tear bag actually a term? I've never heard that before.
Yeah, I know it doesn't sound terribly technical, but that's what I've always read in the literature is just the tear bag. It's just the crescent-shaped pocket of fat underneath the lower lid.
Interesting.
So I'm also looking at the negative space here and look how much white of the eye or how much the sclera of the eye is visible versus the iris. That'll help you give you a good idea of how big the iris sits in the eye opening. probably should be working on a tone canvas, because yeah, a lot of the struggle here in the beginning is just covering up the white of the canvas. Just with an average value. That's okay. It doesn't take too long.
Can you do the next one on a toned
Yeah, sure.
background? So you said you're going to start doing features for the next few.
Yeah, I may not do features like all, in subsequent weeks. I may skip a couple weeks and to do other subjects. If, if there's something in the news happening or a famous celebrity dies, I may, go back to doing that kind of a caricature. But yeah, in the coming weeks, I'll get the main features of the eyes. I mean, that's right, the main features of the face drawn.
Maybe we should ask people what they would like to see next.
Yeah. Which feature would you like to see me go over next?
So back to the eyes. Alan's asking, when introducing the detail of the eye in a portrait, do you add an early, let's see. Sorry, my eyes are playing tricks on me. When introducing the detail of the eye in a portrait or caricature, do you at an early stage in I can't I'm sorry, can't read it. I think some words are left out.
When introducing the detail of the eye in a portrait or caricature, do you it at early stage, middle, or later stage in relation to the other features?
He asked it earlier too. Let's see. When starting to introduce detail after establishing the proportions, do you start, are eyes something you prefer covering at an early stage, or do you ever leave it for the end?
My general technique when I'm working on a face, whether it's a live portrait model that I only have for a couple hours or a painting from a photo that I have lots of time in my studio, is I generally have a block-in stage for the whole face, and then I just dance around the face. I just go around the face and finish different areas at different times and sort of bring everything up all together. So I'll jump back to the eyes several times during a painting session. Yeah, it's not just do it at one time and then forget it and then move back, and move on to something else. You can do that if that's your style, if that's the way you want to do it. There's no rule saying you have to do it a certain way. But because I am more of a trained in an alla prima method, direct painting, mixing the paint on a canvas, it kind of helps to see everything develop all at the same time, like everything gradually be lifted up to a higher and higher level of finish, rather than like finishing just a corner or like an ear and then moving on down like you're painting a house. I don't like to do it like I'm painting a house.
Well, I think too, in traditional painting, if you mix a color, you want to try to use that color all over, right?
Yeah.
All over the canvas, just kind of as a efficiency.
Yeah, definitely. Good point.
But now with digital, you really don't need to worry about that. So Alan, hopefully that answers your question. Sorry, it was kind of a struggle.
So this blocking stage again, very blocky, very rough, but I'm just thinking about overall what's happening with the lights and the darks. Not even really thinking about my edges at this point, but I will start to think about the edges now that it's essentially blocked in now.
So did you tell them about the podcast you were on?
Oh, no. Yeah, I forgot to mention, I just interviewed, or Jason Seiler just interviewed me. I was on his podcast that aired yesterday. If you just go to his YouTube page, which is just Jason Seiler, It's his Face the Truth podcast. We just talk about art, digital painting versus traditional, and working as an illustrator, some of the concerns that come up and problems that we have. Jason and I have known each other since probably 2003, 2004. We used to just communicate and write each other, send each other questions and advice on art in general. Yeah, good guy, good podcast. He has a lot of people on his podcast. You should check that out. He talks to a lot of creatives, a lot of artists and musicians, and other people who work in creative industries, comedians. Jason himself has actually gotten into stand-up comedy. At least he was before the pandemic, which is a pretty bold thing to do. That takes a lot of guts.
How long was the podcast? I haven't watched it yet.
About an hour and 20 minutes.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's an investment.
Yeah. You can just, keep it on in the background while you're working in your studio, because it's not a visual thing, really. I mean, we're not showing artwork or anything. So,
Well, the thing about me is I tend to play things on YouTube at double speed or speed and a half because I'm impatient.
yeah, you can try that. It'll be available on Apple Podcasts as well. So, I think he's going to get that up there soon if it's not up there already, maybe within the week. If you want to just download it to your device and listen to it, you can do that too.
And does his podcast have a name? Or just Jason Seiler?
Well, his YouTube page, it's just on the Jason Seiler YouTube page. But the podcast is called Face the Truth. I don't know if he has a separate YouTube page for Face the Truth. You could look into that. Okay, let's get a streaky but textured paintbrush here.
Are you using one of your brushes right now?
Yeah, I'm using my Laguna Filbert Grainy brush, which is basically a streaky brush with some texture applied.
Because Murad is asking, what is the perfect brush to do skin tones? Should you use a hard or soft brush?
Generally harder brushes, but I do a mixture of both. A hard edge brush at some times and a soft edge brush at other times. Don't rely on any one brush too much. Even on the same painting or different paintings, I cycle through lots of different brushes. I usually just use my own now, but in the past I would get brushes from other artists that I liked a lot. And that's how I learned about brushes, was downloading other people's and playing with their custom brushes, figuring out what I liked.
So when would you use a soft brush versus a hard brush?
It just depends. I don't have a rule. It's not something I can really teach. It's just when you want to use a soft brush, use a soft brush. Because if I say like a rule or something that it's a time when it's to use a soft brush, then you'll think that that's the right time to always use a soft brush. Like some people might think when you want to do blending, use a soft brush, but that's not necessarily the case. You can definitely still do great blending with a hard edged brush, a streaky brush. It's just a matter of how you apply the brush strokes, the values you use, just your technique. It's way more important than the kind of brush you're using. It's good to have a variety of brushes, but there's never one brush that's right for all situations every time you paint that certain thing. Like there's not a brush for the eyes or a brush for the Rocky Mountains or the hair on someone's head.
Darn.
Mm-hmm. Remember that lower lid is narrower generally than the upper lid. The upper lid will always overhang it, especially on the outside, the outer corner of the eye. He has like 4 weird highlights in his eye here, probably because he's under a, I don't know, some kind of taking publicity photos or something. There's probably lights all around him, so it's kind of unnatural to have that many highlights in an eye. If you want to, like, you know, if you see something like that, maybe you can blend them together. Maybe one simple highlight just to make it feel a little bit more natural.
I'm seeing a lot of people with those ring light reflections in their eyes.
Yeah.
Which are really strange.
Again, because of the multiple lights, there's multiple highlights in his caruncula area, at the inner canthus. But maybe simplify those a little bit. I sometimes exaggerate the values in the eyes to make them a little bit more readable. Like, I don't see a really strong light brown in his eyes here. It's almost all pure black, but I am going to lighten it a little bit just for the sake of clarity and for making a better painting. And the brightest part of the iris is going to be opposite the wherever the highlight is. Because remember that refraction effect that I talked about, where the highlight in the eye will be the where the darkest part of the iris is, and the lightest part of the iris will be the opposite end of wherever the highlights are. I think I'm going to finish up here in just a couple minutes. I mean, I have other eyes I can draw, but it's the same basic stuff over and over again. I don't want to bore you too much. But let me know any last minute questions you may have.
What's for lunch?
Today I'm going to make Debbie some roasted chicken and, what is it, summer vegetables?
I don't know. You tell me.
Yeah, we got some potatoes and veggies, and I'm going to roast some chicken for a nice hearty meal.
And then I'm going to head over to Mailbox Mayhem, which is the International Society of Caricature Artists online convention, which starts today.
Yeah, are we technically conflicting with that right now with our stream?
Right now, there's nothing scheduled. You may have heard earlier, I checked to see what was going on, and I could not get the volume to go down.
Uh-huh.
But there are a lot of people in video chat rooms. So if you're still interested in joining, I believe they are still taking sign-ups. You can find out information at Mailbox Mayhem. I think it's .com, mailboxmayhem.com. You cannot get the box anymore that came with a bunch of goodies, but you can still get online and participate. And it's possible that they might be having day passes. Not positive, but keep checking because you never know.
Okay, so hopefully it feels like a realistic eye, but just with a bit of extra, you know, some artistic interpretation. That's sort of what I strive for. There might be times where you want to do a really super finely realistic, detailed eye with everything, every eyelash indicated, and that's fine too if that's what you want to do. It's good to be able to do that when you have the desire. You know, you don't want to be hampered by things you don't know or that you can't do. It should always be a choice. You know, your artistic style shouldn't be a result of your limitations of knowledge, but your having experimented with everything, and then decide what you want to do with the with how you handle paint and how you want to express yourself. So that's just about it here. If I find if it's looking too cut out, I might you know, blend some edges here. Even though it's not necessarily realistic, I still might just, you know, I'll lose some of the hard edges between things. Sort of like smudge the paint in places, and it just can create some fun, playful aspects to the painting. Okay, so I think that's about it for today. Any last minute questions, Debbie, that we missed?
No questions.
Cool. Well, hey guys, thanks again for joining me. This was just a shorter stream. Hope you can enjoy the rest of your day. Be safe. Practice some eyes. Look for some good eye photos. If you don't have some, take pictures of your own eyes or your friend's eyes under good lighting, so it's good. There's a lot of light and shadows, highlights, and that sort of thing. In different angles, have the pupil look in different directions. Here's one of my actual, you know, sheets that I made for one of my classes when I taught features at the Watts Atelier. The lighting isn't great in most of these, but you get the idea. Another great way to study eyes is actually looking at marble sculptures, because they really exaggerate the planes and the forms in a way that makes the eye really easy to understand. I guess like this one here. So just think about that. If you ever come across a good marble sculpture in a museum, maybe take a few pictures of it from different angles, and you can get some really good studies out of it. Anyway, that's my advice on eyes for this week. Hope to see you next week. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.